At this time, the chair lays out Senate Bill 943 by Watson and recognizes the author to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I have a committee substitute.
There is a committee substitute, Senator Nicholson, the substitute. The chair recognizes the author to explain the difference between the substitute and the bill as filed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Members, this bill is the product of 2 years' worth of discussions and negotiations to address a pair of Texas Supreme Court rulings that have caused major damage to our Public Information Act. The Boeing case transformed an exception that used to protect the government's interests in a competitive situation into an exception that government contractors now use to withhold virtually any contracting information, including final taxpayer-funded contracts. The Greater Houston Partnership, or GHP case, has made it nearly impossible to get public information directly from a contractor that's spending taxpayer dollars. Last session, I'm proud to say, the Senate voted multiple times to return the law to the way it worked before Boeing and GHP. Unfortunately, that seemed to be a non-starter, and in some places, including with so many contractors who were happy that they were able to take taxpayer dollars but wanted to keep secret how the money was actually used. So leading up to and during this session, my office and Representative Capriglione in the House have negotiated with over 100 stakeholders to craft the committee substitute that's before you today. It's important. Rather than go back to the way the law used to work, we're trying to establish how the law should work in the future. And I think we're very close to reaching agreement with all of the stakeholders who are working with us in good faith. Overall, the bill's goal is to clearly delineate what information the public has a right to know and what information is truly proprietary and can be withheld in order to foster competition. We've done this in a few ways in the committee substitute. And I apologize for the length of this layout, but I want to make sure everybody's clear on where we are. First, the committee substitute to Senate Bill 943 restores the exception that came up in Boeing so that only governmental bodies may raise it to protect the government's interest. Second, it creates a new exception for contractors, so that they can raise it to protect the truly proprietary information they submit to the government during an open bid or contract solicitation. Third, it updates the Public Information Act's trade secret exception so that the definition of trade secret matches what we've codified in the Civil Practice and Remedies Code. Fourth, it ensures that government contractors cannot raise the proprietary information or trade secrets exception to block the public's access to, one, key contract terms like, and I know this sounds amazing, but this was happening, or is happening, final price and deadlines, and two, information indicating whether or not a contractor performed its duties under the contract. This kind of information is not proprietary, and the public has a right to know about it as a matter of basic transparency. Fifth, committee substitute Senate Bill 943 requires a limited list of contractors that are truly intertwined with government. In other words, they're basically an arm of government to respond to PIA requests they receive about the government work directly. In other words, they're so intertwined with government, like private prisons is the example I put in the bill, that they have to respond directly. And finally, the committee substitute to Senate Bill 943 requires other contractors that have government contracts worth at least $1 million to maintain information about their governmental contracts and share it with the governmental body if the governmental body needs it to respond to a PIA request that the government receives. Most of these concepts were in the filed bill and remain in the current committee substitute, but I want to be clear that we've made significant changes since the bill was filed to address stakeholder concerns. We updated the definition of trade secret. We added language in the substitute to allow pricing information in electricity contracts to be withheld until the delivery start date. We clarified that contractors can withhold their sensitive pricing methodology to address a bunch of concerns. So again, I'm sorry for the extended layout, members, but you can see this has been something we've been working on, and there's a lot of detail to it, and it's been a lengthy process, but I wanted you to know about that, and I'm happy to answer any questions of the committee, and I'm confident we'll have some people testifying.
Any questions, members? Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Watson, I've had a couple of folks come by just concerned that this may capture small businesses that have small contracts, and I'm just not, you know, I know you've worked hard, and so I look forward to working with you on anything. Are you concerned in any way that maybe smaller businesses have very small contracts?
I am, and we're continuing to work, and it'd be interesting to hear, but let me tell you what I think is the issue that you're addressing. There are, in essence, in this bill, two buckets. The first bucket is what I kind of described, which was those businesses that like private prisons, the Alamo entities that have been created around the redoing of the Alamo, where what government does is it in essence creates an arm of government.
Right.
And in those instances, what the bill does is it says that arm of government ought to have to respond directly. In an effort to try to make sure we are able to get the information, we set a floor. And what the floor was is we said that if a business receives in a given year $1 million or more from a governmental entity, and that $1 million or more constitutes 60% or more of that business's income, that was then a business that ought to respond directly to the Public Information Act request. If they don't fall under those categories, and there's some other exceptions, then they would fall in the second bucket, which is where the Public Information Act request would have to go to the government. Right. And if they have over $1 million, they would have to make sure that they hang on to their information and they provide that to the government in being responsive. Right. It's a long way to get to this point. I do have concern, and we're continuing to work. That's primarily the concern. I think we've addressed pretty much every issue except in the small contracts where a business may get, one year they get a big old contract with the government, probably that's over $1 million and certainly over 60% of their income, and then all of a sudden we've made them a governmental entity. Right. And I'm still trying to figure out the best way to do that. And if anybody testifies on that, I have a couple of questions about the ways we might solve that.
Yeah, I think there might be a section that we can talk about, you know, that we can make an exception or something like that.
The concern I have with making a specific exception, and I think I know what you're referring to, is that everybody wants to have their own exception. Sure. And trust me, everyone wants to have their own exception. Yeah. There are people's names, I think, that they want to have in the exception. So what I'm working on is something that would make it more of applies across the board. I'll give one example, and I would be happy to hear from some that are opposed to this or on it now or wherever they are, how they respond to this. But if you're over $1 million and it's over 60%, first of all, keep in mind, you have to have a contract with the government of taxpayer dollars of over $1 million. Right. But that being said, if it's in response to a bid, right, or it's an arm's length negotiation, right, then that could apply to everybody. You don't have to exclude any one person. But in that instance, the government's not trying to keep an arm, create its own arm. Right. So maybe that would be
and that's a good example, because you can get a paving or a construction or an engineering contract. You may be a 2 or 3 person shop, and maybe you get a contract for $1 million, $1.5 million, and you don't have a general counsel on staff. You don't have all these folks. So it's either that or a response to a bid. you could also possibly create a system to apply for a waiver where I don't know who's going to be enforcing this. Is it the AG?
Could be the AG.
So the AG, if they write and go, hey, I just got this bid and I'm just growing my business. I was one time with a big firm. I'm on my own now, and I got this award. But I'm not a
Yeah, we've thought about some of that. Again, I think the best way is a more general one.
Okay.
That would put them into 372 in the other section where they have to hang on to the information and provide that to the governmental entity. My concern, as I've now laid that out, is, as you know, when you negotiate bills like this, you'll fix that, and then tomorrow we'll have another one. But I think we can deal with that in good faith, and I am concerned about it. And in my opinion, that may be the last thing. I may hear something new today, but that may be the last thing that we haven't completely worked out, and I think we've got to fix.
Well, I'm supportive of your legislation. I just wanted to bring up that
I'm
issue.
glad you did.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thanks, Senator Menendez. We do have testimony, so we're going to open up public testimony on Senate Bill 943. I will point out that Senator Watson's still working on this. We have no one registered against the bill, and so I'm sure as it's in process, brevity would be appreciated on that. At this time, we'll call Jay Avila, Jim Hemphill, John Adamo, and Bill Patterson. Please don't feel like you have to use up the entire 3 minutes.
Yeah. If no one signed up against it,
That's my point.
yeah, let's try not to create somebody that is against it.
Hey, Senator Watson, the bill's in good shape before these gentlemen.
I know, but I'm begging them.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know.
My name is Jay Avila. I am a reporter with a TV station, WOAI, San Antonio, and also for Texas Association of Broadcasters, testifying on the bill. And just wanted to bring one or two real-world examples of how Boeing has affected access to public records and also to just fundamental journalism. In 2013, I did a story where I requested from the city of San Antonio all of the contracts that it had made with private businesses where they were getting from the governmental entity tax incentives, grant money, or fee waivers in order to bring their business or expand it in San Antonio. And those contracts also include what the private business agrees to do in return for the tax money, how many jobs it would create, how much those jobs would pay, and by what time period they would create those jobs. And under the contracts, they have to file quarterly reports letting them know if they are meeting those deadlines for those jobs. So I did receive in 2013 the contracts and the quarterly reports, and was able to do a story where found that 1/3 of the companies were not hitting their targets. But we also reported what economic development was doing to claw back the money, and if they were able to do that in protection of taxpayer money. The economic development director at the time was very grateful for the story. He wanted the public to know what he does to create jobs in San Antonio, and what he does when there is a situation where the business needs more time or a cure period, or he has to claw back some of the money. At any rate, I tried to do this story again 5 years later, and by this time the Boeing decision had come down, and so instead of receiving the contracts and the documents, the letters were sent out to companies, many of them very diverse, Microsoft, Halliburton, Ernst & Young, and they were basically given the opportunity to withhold the contracts and the documents, and in most cases they did, and we just could not have that information or see how the program was working. But we've come upon this many times. We couldn't even find out how much Pat Benatar and REO Speedwagon were paid for playing the Tricentennial in San Antonio. So these contracts should be open to the public, and we hope that this bill will restore that.
Thank you. Go ahead, next.
Hi, my name is John Adamo. I'm an Associate General Counsel with the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. I work closely with the Responding to Public Information Act request. I'm here as a resource witness and will be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Jim Hempill. I'm a lawyer here in Austin and president of the Freedom of Information Foundation of Texas, here to testify in support of the bill. Thanks Senator Watson and his staff, as well as Representative Capriglione for conducting this series of stakeholder meetings over the past 2 years. And I think it's been a very extraordinary series of meetings because we've brought together open government advocates, business interests, medical field, economic development people, all of the stakeholders on all sides of this issue to come together, to find common ground, and to have a bill that does not restore the law to the pre-Boeing and Greater Houston Partnership status, but that does balance the interests of transparency in government and legitimate concerns of businesses regarding confidential information. And regarding the issues that Senator Menendez discussed with Senator Watson, we certainly are amenable to looking at the small business issue because really, as Senator Watson said, the concern we have is the outsourcing of government functions. That type of situation, like the private prisons, those entities respond directly to Public Information Act requests, but that some small businesses might not be in a position to do that. So really, our interest is to make sure that that information is available and not necessarily to add burdens to small business. Excuse me. So I think you've heard some examples of why these decisions, Boeing and Greater Houston Partnership, had turned back the clock on government transparency in a way that really left the public not aware of how government money is being spent. And that's really what this is about, is how is government money being spent and how are government entities making decisions about what types of contracts to enter. And we think that this bill does strike the balance, and we're in favor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, committee, my name is Bill Patterson. I'm representing the Texas Press Association and individually as owner of Denton Media Company, the Denton Record Chronicle, and related websites. I, too, want to thank Senator Watson for his efforts to work on this bill. I think it's very important, and I have 3 quick examples I want to cite that have happened in Denton. The first one being the Denton Energy Center was a $265 million capital project, largest capital project ever by the city of Denton, sharply divided 4-3 vote. It went forward, and it's backed by 55,000 ratepayers of Denton. The only way that anybody could find out the information was because of the state law requiring disclosure when a city issues bonds. The cost to operate the plant is about $8.1 million a year, and there's about $25 million a year in financing starting with the 20-year obligation starting in 2020. In 2018, the City Council and the officials with Denton Municipal Electric said that the Energy Center performance is like a foggy crystal ball, and they weren't sure how it was going to perform. The estimated loss for the first year in 2020 is $1.8 million, and by 2023 they anticipate the loss of $12 million. They claim the debt can't be covered by market revenue, and so what are we to do? Denton taxpayers are on the hook for this $250 million plus project, but thanks to the Boeing decision, we aren't allowed to see the executed contracts, the noise and emission calculations, or the enforcement penalties for failure to fulfill contract requirements. Another case that just happened a couple of weeks ago, Boeing was cited as an excuse to withhold details of environmentally sensitive cleanup of a local radioactive facility in Denton. I would assume that the public should have the right to know. I'm sure you guys would want to have the right to know if it was in your neighborhood. And just lastly, last week, the University of North Texas cited Boeing as a reason to withhold brand audit documents that look at what people think of 3 UNT schools and their marketing strategy. Shouldn't a public university talking about public perception and how they might spend public dollars release those findings? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, panel. And next we have Perry Fowler and Terry Hall. Go ahead, Perry.
Good morning, sir. Mr. Chairman, committee members, thank you for allowing us to be here today. Here today to testify on the bill. I'm representing Texas Water Infrastructure Network. We're a construction trade association. We're certainly better with the committee substitute, I guess, but what the bill doesn't address is upfront competitive bidding and procurement processes, which is where we typically focus our efforts. Usually that's where the projects go wrong. When you have somebody that's trying to fix the rules of the game. There's just an article yesterday in the Monitor newspaper about a project in Weslaco that's been 10 years in the making, and now people are finally going to jail. And actually, Senator Zaffarini helped us to get that law changed. And there's some bills before the committee that Senator Nichols, Zaffarini, and Paxton are working on to help address some of these issues. So again, I just wanted to say that we need to focus on the upfront process here. It's good to have clarity and transparency, but once you get too far down the road, it may be too late to actually help save the public dollars and competition, and that's what we're concerned about. But we think that the bill as a sub is okay. We're okay with it and hope it works for what it's supposed to.
Thank you.
Okay.
Terry?
Hi, good morning. My name is Terry Hall with Texas Turf and Texans for Toll-Free Highways, and we are a proud member of the Sunshine Coalition that's very much in favor of this bill. And we just wanted to mention that there's been a lot of issues through the years, as you probably remember, with TxDOT contracting, and we have a lot of concerns with that. I've done probably hundreds of open records requests through the years, and a lot of times we get a lot of pushback, not just from the public entities, but a lot of times from the private contractors that are doing business with the state. And so we are very in favor of this. We'd actually like to see it go a lot further. To Perry's comments, this is one step in the right direction, but we really feel like there needs to be a lot more transparency when it comes to the public's right to know.
Thank you. Thank you, panel. Anybody else wish to testify on, for, or against Senate Bill 943? If you'll step forward.
Mr. Chairman.
We'll have to, Senator Watson.
I would like to say just two things real quickly. One is, we got somebody else. The bill does address how you deal with bid documents and those sorts of things. But there's been, I will visit with this gentleman to make sure I understand completely what it was that is his concern. But it's actually the bill, to make it work and be more practical. We divided things up about here's what you have to report, things like final contract numbers, whether or not there was breach of contract, things of that nature, real basic stuff, and then how you deal with bidding, so that that's where sometimes you get the proprietary information. So we've actually addressed that, but I'll visit with him. And then one other thing, in response to Senator Menendez, I said that I thought there was one other issue. There's one other that I thought of as I was listening to the testimony, and that is we've had at least an issue raised by private universities that get money from the state that they pass through. That is, in my view, that's not intended to be a part of this, because it's not the same sort of contract. It is a pass-through of grant money to the individual students, and it's going to those students. I just thought I'd say that out loud in response.
Referencing like TEG grants.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay. Thank you. All right. If you would state your name and who you represent.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Robert Johnson. I'm an attorney with Foley Gardier just down the street. And over the past 10 years, I've done an increasing amount of work with the Public Information Act, both representing businesses trying to protect sensitive information, representing requesters trying to get information from government, and occasionally representing small governmental entities that run into a particular sticky request and need some extra help. So I've kind of seen this statute from three different sides and spent a lot of time in it. I'm testifying in favor of the committee substitute, and more importantly, in favor of the process. I think this session was very refreshing because we started from the realization that Texas businesses, just like the open government advocates, are interested and supportive of government transparency, because Texas businesses are very concerned taxpayers, and we have the same concerns everybody else does. So when we got all the stakeholders together, thanks to Senator Watson and his staff, Representative Capriglione and his staff and their efforts, when we got everybody in the room together and said, okay, do we have some general agreement on what bedrock information the taxpayers are absolutely entitled to, there was almost unanimous agreement. And starting from that position of an agreement, instead of everybody coming into the room wanting their personal exception and loading a bill up with a bunch of special interest exceptions, changed the entire process. And it resulted in this committee substitute, which is a good balance between open government and the legitimate interests of business. Fixing the trade secret definition is a big improvement to the statute. The Supreme Court decision in the Boeing case came out and ruffled as many feathers as it did because the act was not working terribly well pre-Boeing, and the trade secret definition fixes that. I would want to still flag one issue for continuing consideration, and that's in Section 2 of the bill, the way that exception interacts with the large contract public posting statutes. I'm still worried there may be a contradiction or room for confusion there, but otherwise, this is a good bill that came out of a good process. I hope it's a continuing dialogue in future sessions and that we can keep working together for the benefit of all Texans.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to testify on for or against Senate Bill 943? Hearing none, public testimony is now closed. As Senator Watson continues to work.